Hi everyone. So yeah, like I mentioned, I'm here from CC11. I will be talking about JavaScript animation with the GreenSock animation platform, also known as GSAP, which is much easier to say. So I'll be calling it that for the next 20 minutes. So yes, a little bit about me first. I'm an Australian web developer. Like I just mentioned, I graduated back in March, and I enjoyed the technical process so much I just had to come back. My favorite languages are PHP and JavaScript, which is really great for the Code Chrysalis program. Right, so I'm going to be talking about GSAP. And I'm sure that the very first question that all of you guys are going to be asking is, Sarah, why should I be listening to you for the next 20 minutes? Why should I care about GSAP? These are actually two questions I believe can be broken down into, firstly, why is animation important? Why does animation matter if I'm designing a web page? And secondly, why should I care about GSAP over any other alternative technology? Because there's a lot of other ways that you can animate things in the browser these days. So I'm going to be spending about half of the talk, up until here, talking about these two questions, why GSAP is important, why you guys should be listening to me. Then the rest of the talk, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how to use GSAP and the technical portions of it. So, looking forward to that. Before I jump into this, I would like to set the stage, get everyone familiar with what GSAP is. So if we come over to the GreenSock website, you can find us at greensock.com. If you're watching from home, you can probably browse through this while I'm talking, actually. Here at GreenSock has a showcase which shows off a bunch of different samples of websites that have been made using GreenSock. I picked out one of my favorites, which is the Virtual Economy. I believe this is also using Three.js or some other 3D library. But all of the tweening, all of the animation, all of these special effects, that's all GSAP. That's all the magic of GSAP. I'm not going to be talking about anything that's complex today, but hopefully I'll be able to give you guys a quick introduction to this, get you guys interested, hopefully, in adding some magic to your next project. Alright, so let's come back to these two questions. I'm going to take a step back and talk a little bit about why I think animation is important. So I have picked out 3 reasons that I think animation is important, but I'm sure that everyone in the audience today has their own reasons. My first reason is, firstly, user retention. So in 2014, I believe, Time magazine published an article discussing how users spend an average of less than 15 seconds on each web page before moving on. So animation is a great tool you can use to catch their attention, maybe convince them to stay more than 15 seconds on your website, and maybe convert them into regular customers. Second reason is usability and understandability. So something that you might notice about these slides is that these are also animated. This is all animated using GSAP. So animation is just a great way to draw users' attention to what you want them to be looking at, makes your content more digestible, easier to consume. It's a lot easier to understand. Right, and the last reason I'd like to talk about is just because it's cool. I think a lot of us get into development because we love making things. Animation is really one of those things that's really satisfying to look at the end of the day when you have a finished product. Right, so those are my 3 reasons. You can feel free to share your own reasons with me later. Next, I want to talk a little bit about GSAP compared with other technologies you can use for animation. So, lots of different modern JavaScript libraries you can use today that I'm not going to be talking about today. Today I'm going to be talking about CSS and jQuery. And you might be wondering, Sarah, why are you talking about these two? And my reason is because these are 2 pretty common technologies still being used today. If you are still using these, if you get stuck using these for animation in a future job, I'd like to maybe have a go at convincing you to pick up maybe an alternative if you want to use animation in the future. So a quick introduction to this firstly. So CSS, if you have touched web development before, chances are you're already familiar with this. So hands up, how many people in the audience have worked with CSS before? Yeah, that's basically everyone. For anyone watching at home, basically everyone put their hands up, which is what you would expect. Out of curiosity, how many people have used CSS animations and transitions? Yeah, a few. Less, but you guys can hopefully help me out with some questions later. So, for people who aren't familiar with CSS, it is a styling language. It is used basically universally to make website's pretty, and it does happen to have some animation features. Next, jQuery. Now, this is a little bit less prevalent these days. When I was deciding whether or not to include jQuery in this talk, I actually wasn't sure because I was thinking, who really uses jQuery these days? It's kind of being pushed out of the limelight by the hip new kids on the block, like React, Vue, Angular. But I looked this up, right? I looked up the numbers. According to buildwith.com, out of the top 1 million websites online today, in terms of traffic, over 80% of them are still using jQuery. Out of the top 10 million, over 75%. So, statistically speaking, chances are you're going to end up using jQuery sometime in the future, and it's still worth talking about. So out of interest, how many people have used jQuery before? Yeah, how many people have done animation with jQuery before? So yeah, a few people. So it looks like you had fun, Felix. Alright, so today I'm going to be talking about pros and cons of each of these. So let's start off with the pro of CSS. So this is native. If you care about file size, I think the number of people who care about file size these days is decreasing. But if you care about that, this is a pro. So you don't have to download anything. Your users don't have to download anything. Everything's built into the browser. Bit more of an important benefit is that it is very common, right? Because it's native, it's basically universally used. Chances are you already know CSS, as we just saw. Chances are your coworkers and your future coworkers already know CSS. So there's not much of a learning curve. If you just want to add some transitions, it's pretty easy. Another pro of CSS is that it's very fast, but I do want to discuss this a little bit more in detail later. And a con of CSS is that unfortunately it is a little bit inflexible. It lacks a little bit of functionality when it comes to animation at least. So this is something that you'll find in common with CSS and jQuery. Because these are not dedicated animation solutions, jQuery as well is supposed to be used for DOM manipulation and DOM traversal primarily. You will find it missing some features that you would usually want out of an animation solution, right? You find yourself fighting it a little bit when you should be working together with it. So I will be showing on the next slide a sample of code snippets in each of these three tools so we can compare how easy they are to use, but we'll get to that in a moment. So I want to first talk about some pros of jQuery. So a pro of jQuery is it is jQuery. Like I mentioned before, it is still the most commonly used JavaScript library online today. Because it's so widely used, there's a lot of support, a lot of documentation. Chances are if you want to do anything with jQuery, there is a Stack Overflow question and answer just for you. Chances are if you don't want to do something with jQuery, if you just want to use vanilla JavaScript, there's still a Stack Overflow answer that says, why don't you just use jQuery? So it's a little bit frustratingly common. A con of jQuery is that it is jQuery, unfortunately. It is, amongst other things, it's pretty bloated. If you're not already using it for your projects, there's not really much point using it just for animations. It is very slow. jQuery is so slow that it gave the entirety of JavaScript animation a bad name. Right? If you're under the impression, if you're in the audience right now, and you're under the impression that JavaScript animation is unacceptably slow compared to CSS animations, and that's why you're still using CSS transitions, that's a lie. That is jQuery's fault. Most of the JavaScript libraries will not run into the same issues, which actually brings me really neatly to my first pro for GSAP, which is that it's fast, right? GSAP is about 20 times faster than jQuery, and in certain use cases, it's actually faster than CSS. So if one of your misgivings about JavaScript animation was performance, and that's why it's still stuck on CSS animations, maybe this is a good time to start looking into some JavaScript solutions. If you don't believe me, you don't have to. If you come over to the GreenSock website, so again, this is greensock.com, they actually have a speed test here. And it shows, it just animates a bunch of elements really quickly, and it compares the performance of jQuery with a bunch of other JavaScript libraries and with CSS transitions. So if you're feeling skeptical, feel free to check that out. Yeah, it's very interesting stuff. Okay, so back here, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the pros of GSAP. It is pleasant and easy to work with, which is something great to hear if you have been stuck working with CSS transitions and jQuery up until now. So GSAP is an example of a solution that's actually built to make life easy for animators. So yeah, really easy to work with. And also, it's packed full of functionality, it's super flexible, it can tween basically anything that JavaScript can see. And yeah, it's also got a bunch of plugins if you want to do anything extra. And lastly, before I move on to examples, I should talk at least about one con for GSAP, which is that it is a third-party library. Unfortunately, this does mean if you want certain features or if you want to use it in certain commercial environments, you do have to pay for a commercial license. So if your budget is tight, that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so I've been promising for a while that I'm going to look at an example. So we're going to look at an example. Here we have a scene with a bouncing ball. There are actually two animations being applied to this ball right now. Can anyone in the audience tell me what the two animations are? Possibly. Yeah?
Translate?
Translate, yeah, that's
it?
Yeah, that's a translate, yeah, two translate animations, yeah?
Translate what? Translate it.
Yeah, exactly, yeah, Vic got it. So, I can't give out prizes, but maybe you can get a free shirt from Code Chrysalis Coding Bootcamp. So, if you didn't hear that, what Vic just said is there's a vertical animation, which is the bouncing up and down, and there's a horizontal animation, which is the ball going from side to side. So let's have a look at how each of these three tools handles attaching two animations to this ball. So first is CSS. Don't worry if you can't read this or if you can't be bothered. I just want to show you guys how much work is going into making this ball move. So here CSS actually isn't that bad, right? It's got three code blocks. One code block for the left-right movement, one code block for the up-down movement, and one code block here at the top, which attaches the two movements to this ball. It's actually not that much work, but I don't know if everyone necessarily would find styling blocks intuitive way to define the animation. Maybe not, depends on you. Next, let's have a look at jQuery, Felix's favorite jQuery. So here we have, you see there's a bit of a chunky boy here. We have two blocks of code here. This, again, have one block of code for the up-down animation and one block of code for the left-right animation. And this is an example of what I was talking about before, where because jQuery wasn't designed with animation in mind, you kind of had to fight it for some features that you would usually expect to be inbuilt. In this example, jQuery does not actually support infinitely looping animations. It doesn't support reversing or yo-yoing animations. So you have to kind of build it yourself. It is a little bit frustrating and it can be really difficult to do when you get to more complex animations. So let's have a look at how GSAP handles this instead. So we have two lines of code for two animations, which is, I think it's pretty easy. Anyone who's nitpicky in the audience might argue that this is actually two code blocks because you can add line breaks in. But the point is that all of the features that you would expect an animation toolset to have is here. All you have to do is add in the configurations that you want. So I am hoping that I've made a good case for GSAP because the rest of this talk from here onwards is going to be entirely about how to use GSAP and how to think with GSAP. Okay, it's been a while since I've taught this much, so let's take a breath. Okay, diving into the rest of the talk, before I get into any code, I want to talk about a concept called tweening. You might be asking, Sarah, why are you stopping to talk about tweens right now? Well, I have heard GSAP described before as a tweening library rather than an animation library. And I think that's pretty accurate. All of the animations in GSAP can be described in terms of tweens. So, what is a tween? Tweening is an animation term. It comes from the word in-betweening, right? And the idea of a tween is, let's say you have an object at point A over here. So this is the beginning of your animation. And you have a point to point B over here, which is where you want the object to end at the end of the animation, right? So point A and point B. Tweening is the process of calculating all of the frames in between to make a smooth transition, right? From A to B. So if it says in clear, I have an example here. So we have this ball. This is at 0 pixels on the x-axis. Let's say that we want to bring this ball over to our point B. So we want this ball at point A to move 100 pixels to the right to point B. So what GSAP does is you tell GSAP point A and point B, and GSAP will calculate all of the values, all of the frames in between to make a smooth transition. So you see, in this case, it's pretty trivial because you might say, well, to get to 0 to 100, all you have to do is do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all the way up. And I would say, yeah, it's pretty simple. And all of the animations in GSAP are based on this super simple concept. So now that we know that, just keep that in mind moving forward because I will be mentioning tweens a few more times. Let's look at some code finally. So here we have exactly the same animation as we just saw on the previous slide. We have a ball and it's moving across the screen 100 pixels to the right. And above the animation, we see the line of code responsible for running it. I have here broken down this line of code into 3 parts, and we're going to drill into each of these parts and see what's going on. So in red here, we have the method name. In yellow, we have the target. And in green, we have the values. So I think that the values are the easiest part to explain. So I'm going to start with this green section here. So in green, this is what you give GSAP when you're telling it the point B. You're telling GSAP where you want the animation to end. In this case, you're saying, hey GSAP, can you take this ball, and at the end of this animation, I want it to have an X value of 100. And it takes care of all the tweening for you. As you've probably guessed, GSAP can animate a lot of other things aside from positions, so I've got some other examples. So in this case, we're telling GSAP, hey, change the color spread. In this case, we're telling GSAP, change the opacity to 0, and GSAP makes it fade out of existence. The third example is a little bit more special. We're tweening 2 properties at the same time. So you're just saying, GSAP, I want, at the end of this animation, this ball should be at x equals 100, and it should be scaled up by 3 times. So it should be 3 times bigger. So GSAP has no problem with that. You can animate, you can tween as many things as you like with GSAP. Sky's the limit. So I kind of mentioned this a little bit before, but GSAP can tween anything that JavaScript can see. So that includes JavaScript variables. That blew my mind when I first heard about it. GSAP can tween JavaScript variables. It can tween CSS properties. It can tween SVGs. Super flexible. It's super fun to play around with. Okay, let's move on backwards. Going to go back to the first parameter here, which is in yellow. This is the target. This is where you tell GSAP what object you want it to animate. So in this case, as everyone in the audience is familiar with CSS, you should be familiar with the CSS selector. So you can pass GSAP a string, which is the CSS selector, telling it all of the objects that you want it to animate. You can tell it as many objects to animate as you like. In the second example, you're passing it a JavaScript variable reference to a DOM element. So this is actually pretty fun because GSAP interfaces really well with third-party libraries. For example, if you're using Vue, you can also pass it a Vue reference. If you're using jQuery, you can pass it a jQuery object. It's super flexible. And very last thing here, I'm going to move on to the method name in red. And this is GSAP has a bunch of different methods, but today I'm talking about 3 of them, which are to, from, and from to. So the difference between to and from, you can see just looking at the examples here. In to, you are telling GSAP the destination of the animation, you're telling GSAP point B. With from, you're telling GSAP the origin of the animation. So you're telling point A. So in this first example, it starts off in the middle, moves off to the right. In the second example, it starts off on the right, and then moves back to the middle. And you can probably guess from the method name that the third example, from to, you tell GSAP both point A and point B, and GSAP will take the object over from point A to point B. So, hopefully that's been fairly straightforward. These are like the bare basics of GSAP. It's super flexible. There's a ton of other stuff that you can do with it. I'm just going to speed through some other examples. So in this green section here, you can also bring in some special options. If you want to change the speed of the animation, you can change the duration. If you want to make the GSAP wait for a little bit before playing your animation, you can set a delay and it will wait a few seconds before playing. If you want to give it an ease, so this changes how the animation gets from point A to point B. You can say it needs to be elastic or it should be bouncy, and it'll spring a little bit at the end. This is what really makes GSAP great as a tool. It's thinking about what animators want, and it makes life easy for you. So I'm just about out of time for today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw my contact information up on the screen. So I'm Sarah Dating on Twitter, GitHub, and LinkedIn. If anyone, hopefully Alternatively, if anyone in the audience has been inspired by me to pick up GSAP, or even if you have used GSAP in the past and you want to show off to me, please feel free to hit me up. I would love to see what you make. And the QR code on the screen just goes to the source code for these slides. So thank you all very much for your time today.